Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on when you're watching this. This is going to be Chapter 6 of Psychic Warfare, Exploring the Mind Frontier. And I'm just going to roll right into this here. Chapter 6 is Chapter 6 is Self-Imposed Obstacles, Subchapter Mindset, Extreme Secrecy, and No Focal Point. These two previous chapters were pretty small, but I'm going to keep them short to allow a little bit of time for commentary if I see anything that's worth commenting on. All right, self-imposed obstacles. Despite extensive evidence of psi and its tremendous potential use as an instrument of power, we continue to impede our own progress. Our mindset, extreme secrecy, and disjoint research fuel skepticism and criticism rather than seeking truth. That was a short chapter. So we're going to move into mindset. The history of psi in Western society is filled with distinguished scientists from diverse fields who become maligned and professionally ridiculed for their psychic research. People feared that science would undermine traditional religious beliefs. Even electricity was considered to be an occult and mystical force in the 1850s. Robert Hare, or Haar, a major American chemist, Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-founder with Darwin of the theory of evolution by natural selection, and Sir William Crookes, the chemist and physicist who discovered thallium and invented the radiometer, were the first of a continual succession of eminent scientists who endorsed paranormal claims based on their own research. Even today, the 130 years of controversy our physical research is impeding progress. Robert John, professor of aerospace sciences and dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Princeton, related one experience. Quote, "I confess that I discussed parapsychology research with some trepidation, born of previous unpleasant experiences. For example, a lighthearted article in the Princeton Alumni magazine in which I attempted to share some of my experiences in this field with the university community at large brought an intensity and breadth of reactions for which I was totally unprepared, ranging from irresponsible and categorical condemnation on one extreme to equally irrational messianic accolades on the other. Rather than precipitating further such distracting outbursts, I have largely avoided opportunities for public presentation." That seems to be, it doesn't even matter what you're talking about. When anybody acts like that, everybody sort of withdraws. Continuing. As long as the scientific community continues to challenge the existence of psi, experiments to improve our understanding of it are limited. Few Soviet-style experiments are done in this country because it is difficult to obtain funding to explore the mechanism of psi when its very existence is politically controversial in the scientific community. This mindset is best described by one eminent physicist who read SRI's report on years of remote viewing research. Quote, "This is something I won't believe even if it turns out to be true." Even author Ronald McRae, after his investigation into government psi research, is plagued with the Western cultural mindset. Quote, "Personally, I cannot accept the reality of remote viewing." Bearden says, quote, "Even when Western scientists are confronted with the actual Soviet tests of these psychotronic weapons directly over their heads, they do not recognize the weaponry nor the nature of the effects produced. How can this kind of atmosphere promote the search for truth? It won't. It retards it. In 1977, a group of prominent self-appointed people such as Carl Sagan and astrophysicist Dennis Rollins formed the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal to refute all claims of paranormal events. This committee was later rebuked by Rollins himself, a co-founder of the committee, because of the integrity of some of those who make a career of opposing anomaly research. He said, quote, "I now believe that if a flying saucer landed in the backyard of a leading anti-UFO spokesperson, he might hide the incident from the public. for the public's own good, of course. He might swiftly convince himself that the landing was a hoax, a delusion, or an unfortunate or mundane phenomena which could be explained away with further research. This mentality is even more disturbing when we see the debilitating effects it can have. Case in point, a February 1987 article in Omni states, I think I recall Omni magazine. In one strange incident, CSICOP, that was the Sagan committee, the CSICOP official, Philip J. Klaus, learning of a forum on anomalies research that the University of Nebraska was sponsoring, called the school to protest that CSICOP's views were not being represented and that, moreover, in questioning the United States government's word on the non-existence of UFOs, speakers at the conference were seeking what the Soviet Union does, to convey to the public that our government cannot be trusted, that it lies, that it falsifies. As a patriotic American, I very much resent this. After Klaus threatened legal action against the university, it canceled its sponsorship of future conferences of this kind. Klaus withdrew the threat and pronounced himself satisfied with the university's action. Since then, satellite groups of debunkers have proliferated all around the country, determined to do battle with pseudoscience, real and imagined. Not content simply to argue the issues on their merits, they have harassed colleagues and universities into dropping, usually non-credit, courses in parapsychology, conducted vituperative campaigns against anomaly proponents. That is a new word for me. And done, in the words of Philadelphian Drew Endicott, one of their number, anything short of criminal activity to get to the point across to the people who have not demonstrated facility to reason. Okay, so let me read that over. That was a big jumble. Not content simply to argue the issues on their merits, they have harassed colleges and universities into dropping courses in parapsychology, conducted vituperative campaigns against anomaly proponents, and done, in the words of Philadelphian Drew Endicott, one of their numbers, anything short of criminal activity to get the point across to people who have no demonstrated facility to reason. So, okay, he's basically saying people are just harassing them and just short of creating criminal activity. They have done everything they can to get the research to stop. I find it interesting. I really do. I find it very interesting that the term, we've already been loosely, it's loosely been introduced to us that religious people have a real hard time with any of this kind of research. And I find that Philip J. Klaus used his American patriotism as an excuse, as if the university was being un-American by doing research. We have to really consider that. I've already said it before in the previous chapters of Cryptological Aspects of ESP, that it's my contention, not only does stalking and harassment occur on the local and regional level of anywhere where kids might be exhibiting these types of traits and skills, especially when this research was still sort of considered pop culture media or a rumor or myth in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But it's not even like the only combatants to any of it are people who think they know it all already, or as we've seen with Satanic Panic Scare and PSYOPs in the 80s, groups of people who think they have the right, I guess, and no better way to describe it at this point, but if all things are created by God, or their God, their version of their God, then they don't have the right to hinder or suppress or hurt people who, in a logical response, are just examining all things God created. There's no justification in there other than what I've often termed the emotional materialism, where someone holds an idea so closely that any time that idea is advanced upon or even refuted or rebuked later, the response is very poor from that individual who emotionally holds that materialistic view of those ideas or facts or whatever it is. And with that, I mean, if people are willing to do that, if, like they say, just short of anything criminal, people who have demonstrated no facility to reason, what do we think about the consumer technology that's being out there, that's being deployed, and how quickly, the switch from antenna TV to digital TV occurred, and then how quickly the internet is sort of experiencing its own flushing and suppressing of knowledge and content. I mean, for me personally, even outside of all this stuff, I remember back in 2004, 2005, I think it was, there's a bunch of popular websites for music where you can look up the lyrics of a specific song. And some of the, sometimes you hear a song and you're not quite sure what the musician's saying. So I always thought it was a great tool to be able to just look up what they were, and in some cases even just read the lyrics without the music, because that does give you a sense of the song as well. And I noticed that Google itself, in Google Lyrics, when they opened their music store, which I think was just called Google Music or something, all of the lyrics were not only rewritten where you would think it was a typo at first, but the rewritten versions of those lyrics still rhymed and matched, meaning it wasn't a typo. They made a concentrated effort to make it sound like something else because the original lyrics were critical of an idea or a notion or something like that. So now that could literally be one rogue Google employee who, those types of jobs where they're doing data entry and basically typing in stuff by hand and keying stuff in, and there's not, at that time, I doubt there was a way for anybody to oversee that project, by a translation by translation process. That would have been very hard. So it could certainly have been one person. But then later I saw that the censorship and the throttling of certain accounts that I had and still have were completely on lockdown. And back in 2005, and with the use of what we're going to hear in further chapters on here, with the use of the hive mind and the artificial intelligence, so-called artificial intelligence, we're going to see that they've isolated people years before they even came out online. Just by joining average social networks, their interactions, all of it being indexed by Google search engine. If someone was already online for 10 years, creating content, sharing things on forums, we know that they were able to collect that stuff, whether or not you used your real name or not. And I think people were silenced very, very early on and flagged very early on because of what they had already communicated before any of this other content like this started to pop up. And I'm not saying any of what I'm talking about now is mainstream content. It was in the 80s, apparently. I don't know many other people talking about it. I see some stuff on YouTube, and I see some tweets and messages on various forums and posts. But the problem with that stuff is it could be a complete illusion, because having once been somebody who was involved in creating social networks and platforms for people to communicate, I went in as a naive and basically thought, well, this is great, everybody can communicate with everybody and blah blah blah. And in designing those networks, I learned that one of the ways they would make it look busy or popular was to use their own scripts, their own bots, They would, the owners of the website would write their own bots to make the platform look like it was busy. And they would just randomly post stuff from an aggregation method on RSS, which is, I think, real simple syndication, meaning RSS was the method for which you could extract information from a website without having to visit the website. And then it would show up, in your web page if you wanted to just read news directly from your own web page. So they had created bots with a similar mechanism, but what they would do is just share posts on platforms and things like that. Even dating websites, Match.com, eHarmony, OkCupid, all of those various sites would have the same person running 3 or 4 accounts. And in some cases, there's even law enforcement on there, And that I don't mind. I having seen what transpires on those websites, I think it's worth having law enforcement on there. But to aggregate all the data and do all that, and then falsify your user base, which almost every company has been caught doing, just so you can boost your numbers to make it look like what you're talking about is popular. That's disingenuous, and that's blatantly a lie. So as far as any of this content may travel or has traveled or has already been communicated to other people, there's really no way of knowing. I've most of the YouTube views on these videos are completely throttled for some reason, and even down to the number of subscribers for some reason. It's also a different number than what I see on the back end, which is interesting, but who knows? It's hard to say, and to immerse myself into all of that and to sit here and have to try to make sure that everything I say and communicate is somehow being translated to the people I'm trying to reach effectively actually just creates a whole other avenue of distress and things like that. So it's not that I'm not saying it's not worth it to do. It's just, it's a way to make you lose focus. It really does. It makes you lose focus on what you're trying to do. And it's, it's not my platform. I'm sure everybody says that it's a private corporation, whatever. But at the level of users and the number of users on it, any decent lawyer could argue that it was a public platform or a public utility. And even more so, why would any corporation really, if they were made up of real humans, not a bunch of idealistic, egotistical people, why would they care? YouTube was built on irreverent content. It was literally built on irreverent content. So for them to begin censoring, or Twitter was built on irreverent content, in some cases illegal content as well. So there's not really a justification for it, other than you should just have better filtering mechanisms that at least the users themselves can filter, not an automated system that filters for somebody, because that's just a bubble. That's not really giving people the opportunity to explore at their own capacity, or to learn at their own capacity, or to grow at their own capacity. That is literally, without even any hyperbole behind the statement, that's literally a controlling of the narrative. That's the controlling of what people see, hear, and think, because they can't discover what they want on their own. That was a long tangent. I'm sorry. Let me go back into this. So we're on the next paragraph, but just keep some of this stuff in the back of your head, because I do offer the commentary for the few people that might hear these and see these for their own edification and possibly their own research into other things if they're not really too interested in telepathy and ESP, which I would think most people are. But the other, I guess, blindfolds that we all tend to wear because, we're so idealistic about going into these new things or being given new toys and stuff like that. All right, so next paragraph. Given this obstacle, which many in the scientific community create, the military is confronted with a similar situation, both personal and professional. Can the military risk association with the scorned psychic community? Can a military officer? I stated earlier that operational use of psi is equally dependent on the user as well as the psychic. What is the military mindset when dealing with parapsychology? I began this research because I was concerned the military establishment was unaware of psi potential applications, or not taking Lieutenant Colonel Alexander's message seriously. As my research indicates, the government, or at least some individuals, were well ahead of me. They have been involved, daring to try unorthodox techniques and helping demonstrate the existence of psi by using it when all else failed. But the military and government is a reflection of its society. So the controversy exists there also. Congressman Rose thinks skeptics in the Pentagon and CIA are hindering U.S. research in remote viewing and wonders openly about their motives. Quote, some of the intelligence people I've talked to know that remote viewing works, although they still block further research on it, since they claim it's not yet as accurate as satellite photography. But it seems to me that it would be a hell of a cheap radar system if the Russians have it and we don't. We are in a serious trouble. This country wasn't afraid to look into the strange physics behind lasers and semiconductors, and I don't think it should be afraid to look at this. Samuel Kozlov, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy who tried unsuccessfully to eliminate psychic research, dislikes even the mention of so-called psychic weapons. Let's just pause there. So Congressman Rose, I think I mentioned in a previous video, is quoted in Wikipedia as being he's referenced in Wikipedia as being the only person who single-handedly might have modernized the Senate and Congress with technology. I think it's interesting that Congressman Rose himself thinks the Pentagon and CIA are hindering U.S. research in remote viewing and wonders openly about their motives. And then we have somebody from the Navy, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, who tried unsuccessfully to eliminate psychic research. So what kind of fundamentalist decision are these people making to where it shouldn't be researched? We're talking about a congressman who most people think politicians aren't that savvy to begin with. I mean, it's a bit of a misnomer, but people just don't trust politicians in the first place on the the low level, day-to-day level of people like us. But this Congressman Rose was the head of the Intelligence Committee, was on it, was a chair of it. So he was made aware of this stuff, as well as Bush, as well as Reagan. We're talking in the 80s, as well as Carter, most likely Nixon. All of them had to have been made aware of this stuff. So what kind of people would be hindering it and why? And the fact that he uses just this small analogy of a cheap radar system, and the CIA's excuse was that satellite photography is just better. This has nothing to do with photography. Remote viewing has nothing to do with photography. The ability that the door that's being opened, it leads to really eliminating false flags. It leads to eliminating the perpetual lies that are constantly sent through the media or through companies or corporations. I look at it like if you're a parent and maybe you're a new parent, maybe your child's anywhere from 2 to 7, the just fresh perspective, the eyes that children have on the world, they say everything as it is. And a lot of times, I even recall when I was younger, a few embarrassing situations I may have created for my parents where you just say the obvious in the middle of a conversation where everyone's clearly being superficial to one another. And all of those people immediately hate you because you do that. That doesn't make you wrong. That makes them wrong. The fact that they're living in that matrix like that mindset, and that they want to push you into that. Now, on the opposite end of that, obviously, there's you'll hear someone say, you got to know when to hold your tongue. And that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about being able to openly surmise and evaluate a situation and almost immediately recognize when everyone's lying to each other. And if the rebuttal on that is, well, we need to have secrets. well, then so does the populace. You don't get to have a security apparatus that gets to expose everybody, right? If we can't have psychics that can expose everybody. If we can't use our own gifts to surmise when you yourself might be lying to us, or when we find out, even our own children, like, how do you think that affects people? How do you think that affects the family relationship, the developmental process? And even outside of being not having any talent, just the sheer observational skills required to sort of moderate and mitigate your child through life without getting their butt kicked or saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, or knowing when to really speak up and question authority. You have to know your child really, really well. You are the security apparatus around them. They don't even recognize how well you know them. And how do you think? What do you think the Patriot Act and all this other stuff? These clear false flags that if anybody did a little bit of research into it, would find out that the news media themselves are lying. So I guess the Pentagon and CIA recognize that. And like my previous video prior to this one, I think for chapter 4, I mentioned the OKC bombing and a few other so-called terrorist acts that were captured either before or after the event by remote viewers. So it's not about satellite photography. It's not. It's almost like they expected everybody to agree. However, you have to wonder if the context of it all was presented in such a way that it was like, well, it's just for, we're just going to use it to capture known missile silos and figure out where new radar hubs are going up. And it's just like, actually, none of that's needed. All of this research has already told all of you. And we know the Pentagon and the CIA, they all infiltrate each other, and they've all, or NSA and the Navy, they all sit on intelligence committee boards, and all of those boards get debriefings, and the president themselves gets these debriefings, and money doesn't get shifted anywhere without other people knowing what's going on. And just to that point, I have another document for another program that was being run where the IRS was being brought in to help facilitate it. And this is, we're talking straight up psychic research and parapsychological research. So how many people from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were brought in who were fundamentally or religious fundamentalists? How many people were brought in? How many passed the test, got through, and then the minute something came to challenge their perspective that wasn't just the basic, we hate this country, that country hates us, we're going to bomb them, we're going to war, let's bring democracy over there. Anything outside of that, what would possibly happen? And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, those people, I'm not saying they're bad people, those people obviously trying to live a good life initially, but then we have on the opposite end of that spectrum, the complete inversion of those types of people. And when I say the inversion of it, we have people who pretend to be truthful, but are literally creating fake narratives to make everybody scared into doing things. And their fear is that these programs would expose that. War theater, basically. Fake everything. Fake everything. All right, so let me move on to the next paragraph here. Navy research in the mid-70s determined that psychics could detect remote electromagnetic sources. Yeah, I can do that as well. Indicating perhaps they could also detect submerged submarines. The Navy also sponsored research to see if psychics could influence the magnometers used to detect the magnetism of submerged substances. Dr. Joel Lawson, once head of the Naval Electronic Systems Command, said, "I have always believed that ESP is the only way to fight submarines. The magnetometer tests were designed to prove this principle." Once willing to discuss psychic warfare openly, now he has been officially silenced. My own research experience demonstrates leaders at all levels do not have a basic understanding of psychic weapons. I questioned many general officers on the subject of parapsychology, and only one was even aware of what I was referring to. That one senior officer said, If you are interested in that, you need to have your head examined. He refused to even discuss which service or organization I could contact for more information. The total non-familiarity of senior officers I questioned and similar indications from my Air War College classmates is a poor response to Alexander's 1980 message. That's Lieutenant Colonel Alexander's message. Further, the hostile response I received from the one general who had some familiarity indicated either a closed mind or a stay-away attitude. You can imagine my surprise when I later found his name in a 1984 Washington Post article as one Pentagon general who was impressed with some of the psi results and concerned about the Soviets' lead in psychic research. So I take it he meant stay away. Extreme secrecy. Next subchapter. Through additional research, I was surprised to discover the 1982 Air War College research paper presented the most significant contribution award was on this same topic, an unclassified paper, later upgraded to classified, and then completely withdrawn. Contacts with the intelligence community for information brought back a resounding no, regardless of clearance or willingness to make this research effort classified. Discussions with previous DoD psi proponents warned it might be all right to do research in this academic situation, but forget it afterward, or it could be unhealthy for your career. From the study and these experiences, I will assume the government is pursuing psi research. I'm convinced psi has tremendous human military applications which can be used operationally. I'm also convinced that relatively few military leaders at any level are aware of the threat. But most of my original questions remain unanswered. How much research? How well coordinated? How well funded? What priority and impeding funding cuts? In addition, I've developed some new concerns. I expect to learn the truth about military applications of psi and current research so I could help identify impacts within my area of specialization, computers and space systems. Instead, I only confirmed Alexander's warning and found that super secrecy in this area is shrouding the truth, promoting skepticism within society and the military, confining military strategic thinking, and ultimately may be more harmful. I, like Congressman Rose, have to wonder the motive. I felt like an investigative reporter in my own backyard. When talking about the electronic warfare, EW in parentheses, area, experts emphasize how in the past our services treated EW as a black art far too long. The result was improper resource allocation, which left us with our pants down. I contend psi research has been locked on the same course, with significantly greater risk. Many senior leaders have been quick to point out that intelligence is too important to leave to the intelligence community. That's an interesting statement there. Many senior leaders have been quick to point out that intelligence is too important to leave it to the intelligence community. I would add psi capabilities are too important to leave to the intelligence community. Marcello Truzzi goes on a step further. Quote, psi is too important to become the exclusive property of governments, either at home, abroad, who might be interested in exploiting these abilities for their own purpose. I agree with that. Discussions with classmates on this subject demonstrated a reflection of Western society's mindset. Most of the highly technical scientific community didn't even want to discuss it. They may laugh too hard, or if there were any possibility of psychotronics, then the entire scientific community would be jumping at it. Others were caught off guard by its possible reality. And the few who were not surprised, mainly those with intelligence backgrounds, knew something about it but had no idea if we were still actively pursuing psi applications. Next and last chapter. No focal point. The establishment has apparently gone underground and is using titles other than psi, ESP, or parapsychology to contract out research. TARG feels reliable, undistorted scientific information about psychic functioning must be made more easily available and identifiable. McRae suggests it is fear of ridicule that makes DoD so sensitive to this subject. Any CIA report mentioning psi is automatically classified top secret or higher. He also suggests that the parapsychologists not spend a significant portion of their effort on military-related research. Pull quote. The failures of psychic warfare projects in military laboratories, the record shows, have often been among the most irresponsible experiments ever reported. The seances with dead Soviet agents, the multispectral image analyzer that supposedly detects submarines with a photo, the hyperspatial nuclear howitzer, and the anti-missile time warp over the North Pole, to review only a few. I'm not sure if that's a mock or that those were tests that occurred that failed, which again, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We're just talking. Part of the obfuscation of intelligence agency is to mock and make, like I said, go the opposite route and then inverse it or invert it. So next paragraph. His book, Mind Wars, gives an excellent introduction to the broad range of government projects attempted, and what's ridiculous to one may not seem so ridiculous to another. In response, I would suggest he is burning the wheat, in parentheses, those examples used in this paper, with the chaff. Okay, so he's being sarcastic. Opponents of psi research use the failures to justify abandonment, but Professor John says the failures merely underscore the difficulty of the task, not in justifying its abandonment. Historical examples abound of far more frustrating and costly routes to ultimate attainment of difficult scientific and engineering aspirations, e.g., transmutation of elements in manned aerospace flight, to name but two. So he's saying, to say that this is difficult or that we had to encounter a lot of challenges and those challenges made us quit. He's saying, well, what about the challenges that we faced, for aerospace flight and all the, crafting all these new materials? And from what I actually, just to give a little insight into that statement, transmutation of elements in manned aerospace flight, they called the group of people that worked on this stuff in the 60s the Wizards. They were literally called the Wizards. It was a group. There's a file in the declassified CIA library, and it's the Wizards collection. And these are the people that were literally just coming up with stuff, left and right. And then some of it was more related to like brainstorming, where one idea would become successful. So they would look at all the possible alternatives of how that would be executed, at challenges and things like that. And then other ones were like, no, they were tasked with 2 or 3 guys would just go in a room. They'd have a machine shop. They'd have some welding stuff. They'd, whatever. And they would just figure it out. They would just get to it. It wouldn't necessarily be well documented all the time, but they would solve all of these challenges as quickly as possible. So there's no excuse, is basically what this paragraph is saying. The less focused the initiatives, the slower the progress. Well, there you go. And the smaller the knowledge base. The less information, the more destructive misinformation. Targ says, reliable, publicly available information about psi research can help protect us all from the damaging effects of misinformation. And with that, this last chapter here, I think, is no focal point and extreme secrecy. How do we, for it to go underground, which it didn't because, I guess it did, but I was able to find reports from 1996 as well as up to 2003. And it's possible that everything went under code words, sure. Targ believes that after being, spending millions and millions for the government over a 20-year period. So he would have a really good inside track in how this would change hands, so to speak, and then what they would do. But my personal experience is, I've experienced some of the technologies they use to hinder people. I know what brain entrainment is. It does work. It's a real thing. However, let's just remove all the paranoia from it and just talk about someone who's able to tell when it's going to rain by the smell, or someone who gets a headache from this, prior to a rainstorm, or someone's joints who begin to ache a little bit because prior to the rain. That's all energy transformation, all energy transfer, right? That's all the Earth's terrestrial magnetic waves, the radio waves. That's all the stuff that naturally comes out of the Earth from its own weather systems, not the geoengineering or the fake man-made weather. But incidentally, those machines do hinder people as well, and they might be a parallelly constructed lie. For this. So I'm going to go into recommendations as a new chapter and in a new video. And that one only looks like about 5 or 6 pages, but I'm going to end this here. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.